welcome to episode 25 of React Native Radio. Today on our podcast, we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey, everybody.
Lee Johnson.
How's it going?
And I'm Nader Dabbit. Today, joining us, we have Rob Goldiez. Rob, can you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick and give us a quick idea of how you got into React Native or programming in general?
Sure. Hey, guys, this is Rob. I've got a startup business called Hirebotics. We started it about three and a half months ago. In our business, we rent industrial robots to manufacturing companies just to make it easier, to make automation easier. And what we wanted to do as part of it is we cloud connect these robots so that we can get real-time data off them. And we want to be able to present that data to our customers. And so the obvious, our thought process was the obvious way to do that is with a mobile environment versus just a web app or something like that. And so around Thanksgiving of last year, I guess about 4 months ago, I started to look at how we could do this in a mobile environment and got introduced to React Native.
So what other options were you considering before you chose React Native, and kind of why did you choose React Native?
That's a good question. So I actually started, we use Salesforce for some of our backend, not for the real-time things, but for provisioning robots and embedded devices and things like that. And so I started down the path on their platform of developing what they call a customer community, and had some visualizations of real-time data built in their customer community, which is a web front end to their customer's data. And what I found was that it was just somewhat slow. I mean, we love Salesforce, but it was slow. And then you lost things like the ability to notify in real time of events. And so I didn't start down any path other than starting to research if we wanted to go straight mobile and not mess around with the web anymore. There seemed to be a huge following behind React Native. And so to me, it made the most sense. The horse with the most followers made the most sense to kind of jump on that one.
So your company, you guys have robots that you kind of, I guess, lease out, or you guys sell them, or how does that work exactly? And what kind of robots are they?
Yeah, so these are industrial 6-axis collaborative robots. And the way we kind of thought about the business was automation is hard. I mean, it's cool to read on TechCrunch or these different publications about what people are doing in robotics. But when it comes to a real manufacturing company that's going to make a widget all day long or a couple different widgets on an assembly line, figuring out how to take a robot, buy it, provision it, not just program it, but part presentation, how it's going to interact with people in the environment around it, how it's going to be censored, all that. It's pretty complicated. And so we know that every company knows how to hire people. And so the thought was, how do you make robotics as easy as hiring a person? And the way we believe you do that is you charge by the hour. You don't have a big upfront capital cost. You don't make them buy a robot, own a robot, know how to program a robot. And so we literally take robotics and treat it like a person. And so we go into a situation with a customer. We do a full turnkey robot deployment for them, specifically for what they need it to do. Obviously, like an employee, we're looking for long-term work, not short-term work. And to make all that possible, we deploy the robot with an embedded device. We use a BeagleBone with some cellular built onto it. We have some special code that we've written on the BeagleBone in addition to what we write on the robot that talks to some cloud stuff that we've got, Firebase and some other AWS things that collect real-time events and help with visualizations. And then we present that data back to customers by way of our React Native app. So we like to say we charge, we have an hourly rate. We charge by the hour, bill to the second. So if a customer runs a robot for a given day, 16 hours, 32 minutes, and 18 seconds, that's what they get billed.
That's pretty interesting. So what are the typical use cases of the robots that you guys like? Maybe just give me a couple of recent use cases.
Sure.
Like what kind of robots,
Yeah, so we generally target human-centric work. We've got a robot up in Ohio that loads a punch press. If people went to our website, hirebotics.com, you and click on applications, there's a video there of one of our robots tending a punch press every day, all day, multiple shifts. And it makes, this is a part that goes into assemblies for solar panels. And so roof mounts and solar farms, big companies, our customer sells to big solar companies that I'm sure you've all heard of. we just make a widget for them, just like they would have an employee or temp person do it. We've got a new customer that just signed up with us that makes a consumer electronics for the restaurant industry and bars and stuff. And so in that case, it will be assembling electronics into a small hockey puck-like device that's going to sit on bar tops and at resorts and let people with smartphones interact with their servers. And we're getting into medical devices now too, with a new customer that just recently signed with us and tending to some CNC machines for them. And so it varies, but what the common theme is human-centric work in factories.
So it's like a typical use case, a company that already has kind of a process going where they already are assembling a certain product, but maybe they're spending $100,000 a year per employee, and they're trying to maybe cut that cost down to like $50,000 a year. And you guys can like come in and build a robot for that price. Is that kind of your niche? Yeah. Is that kind of how you make sales and stuff?
Yeah, kind of. As you guys know, right, every customer is different. Every company is different. And so, some people are looking at automation for cost reasons, other or for quality reasons. And so, for example, the robot up in Ohio, it does quality checks that you can train people to do, but they were using temporary labor, temp employees to do this, tend this punch press. And so you train a person. If it's a temp employee, they may decide to show up for work for a week, a month, a day, an hour. And so then you're constantly retraining. And so the robot's always going to show up every day. In their case, it does quality checks. It reports production every day on time in real time. And so, sometimes it's cost, but sometimes there's other factors beyond cost reasons. Productivity, the robot's not going to take a break. It's going to work through breaks. We bill only when it's running versus, a human that, bills even during breaks or even when it gets towards the end of the day and they start to slow down. And so sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's productivity. It just varies.
Well, I know you kind of already talked about how the mobile app kind of goes in with all this, but can you kind of maybe go into a little more depth about like how that piece would complement like an existing robot or something, or a new client that you have, and how you guys are using React Native and mobile apps to kind of put all this together?
Yeah. So our vision when we started to think about mobile versus what we could do on the web is, as anybody who works in a factory environment, they're not usually at their desk. They're usually on the floor dealing with issues, talking to people, dealing with supply. They're just on the move, even if it's within their own factory. And so having the data from the robot in the pocket, in a mobile device, it just made sense. And then there's other things that you can do when you have mobile, right? And I'm just kind of talking about what our vision was. And so with a mobile app, you can do push notifications and notify a customer of, one of our customers that has a robot, of real-time events. So if there's a process that we're doing and monitoring, if quality starts to deviate towards a upper or lower control limit, we can send a push notification before it becomes a problem. If raw material starts to get low and we're monitoring that, we can send push notifications when that happens. So there's a lot of things we can do with the real-time nature of push notifications. The other thing, and this is one thing that we're working on for this customer with this consumer electronic device, is in that case, the robot that we're deploying for them is going to do like 8 different steps of their manufacturing process, drilling and gluing and literally a handful of different things. And so what we're going to add to the app, we've already sort of tested it in our environment, is using some React Native components that interact with the camera to do QR code reading. And so the way the customer will interact with the robot to tell it, I want to do process step 1 or process step 7, is they will literally scan a QR code to interact with the app through our Salesforce community, through a Firebase and some other things that we have, to tell the robot, okay, do this next.
So during the entire process of building the app, were there things where you were like, oh crap, this isn't going to work out, or, maybe libraries that you wish there were that that just didn't exist? Did you run into any hurdles or issues when building it, especially in such a short time period?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of chuckling, just kind of reminiscing back, right? So I started dabbling in React right around Thanksgiving, just the very basics, understanding the syntax, because it's this JSX syntax versus just pure JavaScript. And so the daunting things for me when I endeavored on the journey was, how am I going to interact with Salesforce? They had at the time a very pre-release version of their SDK that, because I had to do authentication and things like that. They had a pre-release version that supported React Native. So that was like, holy cow, that was a big burden kind of lifted off. But there were a lot of little bugs, but they were extremely responsive to fixing those things when I posted issues on their GitHub repo. So that was kind of one thing, figuring that stuff out. The other was just the whole nature of push notifications. I've used mobile devices for a long time, but never done any development on them. And so, when I started to read about push notifications, that was kind of daunting, because you got to build, at least my experience, you sort of have to build it all out, what you want it to do. I mean, you can send a little payload to your device from a server, and then what the payload does, that's kind of all up to you. And so that was pretty daunting. And then I started down the path without having like a router, and went with, I think it was React Native Router Flux, which is a pretty popular package for routing in the app. And so that was, there were a couple, I wouldn't say rewrites, but there were a couple turning points in the app development over the course of the 90 days from when we started till it was published, trying to build in some I'll say pretty, not major, but pretty significant components that were pretty daunting at first. But once we got them in there and figured out how to use them, that it definitely was the right decision to make, adding pages and scenes and navigation a bit more straightforward. One thing I'll say that there doesn't seem to be a very strong component around right now, but I've been following one, is charting. And so in our app, in our React Native app, we have visualizations, and we use Keen.io for collecting some of the event data that we're going to use for visualizations. And Keen, they have a couple different JavaScript libraries for doing querying for analytics and turning those into visualizations, but it's all written around the DOM, which doesn't exist in React Native. And so I haven't found, there's a React Native chart or React Native charts that's a fairly new and very active component that's being worked on. I'm not sure it's ready for us to use yet, but anyway, the way I got around that was basically I'm rendering the visualizations in mini web views, and I found a component called React Native like web view bridge or something like that allows me to sort of interact two-way between the mini web views within the app, but not have it look like a full-blown web view that's trying to render ESPN, if that makes sense. And so we have a scroll view, a list view that is rendering different chart widgets that come from Keen using the actual Keen libraries, but the Keen libraries are written for the web, not for React Native. And so, it's sort of masked to the user because I've got a scroll view or list view with a bunch of little web views within it that are all doing the rendering of the Keen visualizations. But once React Native charts, I don't want to, they've done a lot of work, but there's, I'm not sure it's got some of the things that I need yet, although it's close. That's one of the components that we would switch to once it gets a little bit more mature.
That's pretty clever. That's a cool idea. Have you tried any just basic React chart libraries that you could use within the React ecosystem inside your React Native app?
I haven't. Every time I try to use, I'll say any of the JavaScript charting libraries out there, they all want to manipulate the DOM.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
So as soon as you try to include, you can npm install it, and as soon as you try to include it and fire up the app, you get all sorts of issues because React Native doesn't understand that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of the big chart APIs are bridges to Objective-C code, which I'm assuming you did not want to get into.
I didn't. So I haven't done any bridging to Objective-C myself. In fact, one of the, a couple of the things that in Salesforce, their developers have been really awesome in terms of getting feedback on their SDK, which is for Android and iOS, but they've got React Native support now as a version 4, which came out. It came out officially about 3 weeks after I started on this process. But so things like originally their SDK, as soon as if you built a React Native app with their SDK, as soon as the app fires up, you get a login screen, either the Salesforce standard one or a custom one like we did. And that's not a very good experience for a new user. They launch the app and boom, username and password. And so one of the pieces of feedback that I had to the Salesforce team was, is there a way on the React side of things to delay authentication, right? Because they're doing, they basically built a series of bridges to React Native for their iOS SDK. And so just about a week or two ago, they released an update which included some example code of how to delay, where you can control authentication and not have it fire up. And so I just released a small update to the App Store earlier today. Hopefully that'll go quickly with Apple, but where we delay authentication, not for long, but just to present a new user with a splash screen, a button to hit, to take them to log in, and do some of that stuff before login. And so they've been really good, but there were obviously some issues that we dealt with early on.
So I'm very interested. You said you haven't been programming JavaScript for that long. Can you kind of go into how long you have been programming and how long you've been programming in JavaScript in particular, and how long ago you kind of picked up React Native? Because I think to our understanding, you kind of just have been using it for a short amount of time, and it's pretty fascinating to know that someone can kind of go in and pick it up and actually have something in production this quickly.
So, I mean, my background, right, I'm an electrical engineer, and out of college in the mid-90s, I went to work for IBM in a microprocessor design group. And so I've got more of my technical background is on the hardware and semiconductor and CPU design. And so I've been very lightly and surface level familiarity with JavaScript probably for 15 years, but not an active developer, right? Like I took a class when I was an employee at IBM just to learn something new and took something on JavaScript, but not active at all. Over the past, I would say, year, I started to dabble with it on the side. I played a little bit with Firebase just to kind of understand what those guys were doing out of interest in connected products and connected devices. And did a little bit of work in Node when I was tinkering with how we would connect up robots and monitor them and play with Raspberry Pis and BeagleBones. But this is all over the past, I would say, year that I really started getting into JavaScript. But with React Native, it was literally Thanksgiving 4 months ago. And so it went from, it's very, in my opinion, it's very different writing some Node code that nobody really sees, and it, especially on an embedded device, if you kind of get it working and do some testing and it works, it's kind of like, okay, that's good enough. But when you take that leap to something like React or React Native, the quality you got to step up your game. But what was very rewarding about the experience with React Native is once you sort of get over the little hump of understanding the syntax and what they're talking about when they talk about components and states and props and things, things that are, it's just different, right? If you haven't dealt with it before. To me, what is most compelling is the live reloading. And so you can iterate very quickly and try things and learn things and see your results immediately. And so that helps new people like myself get up the curve really quick.
So I see that you're one of the co-founders of Hirebotics. Can you kind of go into what you guys are kind of thinking as far as the future with your company and why you kind of decided to get into robotics at this time? And then after we go over this, we might get back into some more React Native stuff. But this is a question I'm kind of curious about myself.
Yeah. So I started the business. I had the idea of the business last summer and just kind of was noodling on how do you make robotics and automation easier, and hooked up with my co-founder at the very end of the year. And we started the business, in late December, early January. And, our whole goal is to help small to mid-sized manufacturers, primarily in the US, but make them more competitive. And make them more competitive isn't just how do we install robots, but it's the small to mid-sized guys that in our opinion, struggle with it. And I've worked at a number of different manufacturing companies, small to mid-sized manufacturing companies that have anywhere from 100 to 300 employees. And it's just, you might not have access to capital. You might not have access to the expertise and sophistication that it takes to, controls engineers and roboticists and figuring out how you're going to do part presentation and some of the challenges around automation. And then after you get, let's say you can get through those things, or you pay a third party to come in and do a couple $100,000 implementation of a single 6-axis robot, then you're on your own to support it. And that can be daunting as well. If your process changes, if, you're phasing out one product or a model year of a car, if you're an automotive supplier, and you're switching to a new one, it's up to you to figure out how to repurpose that robot or reteach it, so to speak, for what it's going to do next. So our whole goal is we understand that, and we want to make it easier for manufacturers. And so, one robot at a time, so to speak, we're trying to help small to mid-sized manufacturers deploy automation and take advantage of it. And we believe we've got a far more compelling solution, specifically in this end of the segment, and which is a big segment of the market, small to mid-sized manufacturing, because we're not at all offering a couple $100,000 robot installation. We tell customers there's absolutely zero cost up front, not a $500 consulting fee, nothing, right? So we'll go into a company that thinks they have interest in automation, and we're just like an employee that's looking for a job. We're going to size up that company, right? Does it look like there's long-term employment here? Do they look like they treat people well? Are they going to be a good partner? And literally thinking like, do we want to work here? We're not going to show up every day. A robot is. And so we're not just trying to sell somebody a solution and then be gone, right? We're looking at, can we be successful with this automation project? And if we believe it fits our criteria, we're going to take on the project and we're going to deploy a robot and charge by the hour. And again, that's, companies understand how to pay for work that's being done. And we're not asking them to forecast whether they're going to get the return on an investment for a several $100,000 project. And then we believe what's really compelling is that not just do we not ask for capital up front, but because we already have to monitor the robot for preventative maintenance, which is on us, uptime, which is on us, billing, which obviously we want to be able to bill. Because we're connecting the robot, we can pull real-time data off of it and present that back to a user. And so we believe we give them an even more compelling, quote, value proposition than they would get if they went out and bought a solution, because we're not just giving them the robot at a price that they pay only when it's working, but we're giving them a bunch of data in the palm of their hand and push notifications and things like that.
So that's the React Native part is more than just some kind of, check on a robot. It's a big selling point for you guys too.
Oh yeah, we believe so. Different customers have different ways to get access to data, but they already have an embedded computer in their pocket, right? They already have an iPhone or an Android device. Right now, our app is really just built for iOS, but Android is in the future. And we think it's just as compelling, right? That they can communicate with us within the app with real-time messaging to us or to each other. They can see charts and visualizations and chat or communicate in the context of a chart or visualization. They can get real-time events. And then we're starting to work on other things like the ability to barcode scan a QR code to tell a robot, okay, this is what you're going to do next, instead of having to go to a teach pendant, which is what people traditionally do, even if we've already pre-programmed it. Instead of them requiring customer to go up to a teach pendant on a robot and hit stop and switch to a different program and remember which menu, they're on. To our customers, it's pretty straightforward to say, go into the app, hit the QR code button, scan, the QR code on the robot. In our case, it's literally going to look like a badge, right? We're trying to humanize the robots. It's going to look like an employee badge. And next to the picture is going to have a QR code. And they will scan that and it will give the robot the next instructions.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, yep. Your pricing model and the idea of paying as the development goes on instead of having to do a lot of upfront investment sounds like a really good idea. It sounds like something that would be a lot more viable to a lot of companies these days that kind of want to dip their toes in automation but don't want to invest $1 million, $2 million, upfront. Maybe they want to kind of just see how it goes. And That just seems like would be a lot more feasible for a lot of smaller to medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, I mean, we think so because again, what we try to tell customers, even the ones that have the capital that they want to invest in something that makes you unique, right? Robots are really cool, but they don't make you unique. It's not like, it's like a fork truck or a tow motor in a factory, right? That's going to move pallets around. You need one. You don't need to be experts on it. So most companies rent them or lease them. And so not that robots aren't important, but our opinion is leave the robots to the experts and focus your capital on things that make you unique. So one of one of the customers that we're in early discussions with right now, they use Slack. And so we've integrated our robots with Slack before, and not to put aside our app, but if they're already using Slack, we've proven out with webhooks that we can have the robots not just report data through the mobile app and push notifications, but we can also integrate into Slack. And so we're very, very big on kind of getting data to our customers, our operations folks, in whatever means they want it.
Well, you mentioned the humanizing factor with the badges and stuff. I think a robot posting to Slack takes that stuff further. That's pretty funny.
It does. In one example that we did and played around with is, we literally created a webhook. We put a picture, a Slack, so it had an avatar of a robot. And its name was Mr. Roboto. And it would report in data. So it was doing product testing and, turning a consumer product on and off and measuring current and measuring that it was on. And it literally was reporting data periodically to Slack.
So no off kilter jokes or any weird comments.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because in that case, and this was with this was all kind of written in Node to hook into the webhooks, but we did pull in a little haiku package from NPM. So it was not making off-color jokes, but it was posting poems and poetry from time to time.
That's awesome.
A philosophical robot.
That's right. That's right.
Everything that you've been talking about is so exciting, and just like the cool things that come to mind, especially stuff like that the Microsoft team was talking about a few weeks ago with like Code Push. Like if you haven't checked it out yet, Code Push is basically a way to update your React Native apps instantly.
We've got
no shit. There you go. That's awesome. See, wow, you're way ahead of the game.
I don't know about way ahead of the game, but I was looking at Code Push or App Hub. We settled on Code Push probably about a month ago. And I actually think I posted something out to Kevin asking a question about it on Twitter, and somebody from the Code Push team on Twitter proactively saw the tweet and reached out, and that was really what kind of guided me that way, is that here was a developer, someone on the Code Push team that was willing to help make sure I could get this thing wired up and successful. And so, our app that's on the App Store has Code Push in it. Fortunately, we haven't had to push anything major. We pushed a couple small patches in there, but we've got Code Push.
So I would like to know, when you're getting started, especially being new, like what resources did you find most helpful? And I guess what resources maybe did you find not as helpful as you thought? Because surely you used things to help you get there.
I mean, GitHub and Google and are a new guy's best friend. I spent a lot of time early on looking at that website react.parts, I think, which is now js.coach or something, and just kind of looking at what was out there, different components, looking at example code that they have. And, interestingly enough, at least for me, looking at examples of people's components that they had out there on GitHub that you could just pick up, but kind of reading through their examples and looking at code snippets gave me ideas on ways to rewrite things that I was doing. And so it wasn't just like, if I'm trying to pull in this React Native camera to do barcode scanning, let me look at the example, figure out how to stitch it in. I was also learning a lot during that process of other ways to do things or new, ES6 ways to write things and use spreads and stuff like that. And then I've never met him, but one of my React heroes is Dan Abramov, and I actually don't use Redux in our app, but do use Flux type patterns, I guess you'd say. But just watching some of the stuff he's done and following what he's been to some extent an inspiration in terms of ways to think about problems and ways to reason about things and ways to come up, I think, with I'll say clean patterns on how to do things. And so, the biggest thing though, I would say is just kind of diving in and looking at what components are out there and seeing how people are doing things and getting ideas and not being afraid to stitch in a component, see how it works, see if I can get it to work, how it works. And then, if I don't like it, punt and get it out of there and move on to something else. The flip side of that, I guess, and I can't remember exactly how you asked the question, is when I started with React Native, I think it was React Native was on version 0.14. I'll just call it 14. They're on 23 right now. And so early on, maybe because React Native was younger at the time, obviously 10 versions younger, and I was newer, very new. Moving from one version to the next, it was an extremely daunting process. I go from 14 to 15 or 14 to 16 or whatever that first step was, and stuff just broke and couldn't figure out why Xcode wouldn't compile it or what I was doing wrong. And maybe both, React Native has matured a bunch or I've gotten better. And so it's far less daunting to move to a newer version of React when there's something compelling, there's a compelling reason to do it, or a component that I'm using or want to use relies on it.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you didn't have any special like Egghead or video resources or anything that you just went through? You just kind of did the search and conquer method?
Yeah, I think I read, everyone's got their to-do app examples. And so I kind of read through the to-do app on React Native's website and tried to understand how they, state and prop, which is obviously a core concept of React and React Native. Probably something that most take for granted once you just do it for a little while. But early on, it was, a little bit of a head scratcher to figure out what's a state and what's a prop. And then you kind of get into things like Flux or some sort of store so that you're not passing props all around, all over the place. But it was trial by fire. It wasn't, I did very little video watching, mostly reading people's GitHub repos or Medium articles and just kind of seeing what people were doing and trying to mimic it. I wasn't afraid to break things because I felt at least comfortable enough. I was using GitHub on our own repo. I was comfortable enough that if I broke something, I could always go backwards.
Knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would change about the process or workflow on your current app? Like if there's anything, if you just had a shot to rebuild everything from scratch, is there anything that you're like, oh man, this is the way I would do it this time around?
Yeah, certainly. I probably would have spent more time early on wiring up things like a router at the beginning, right? Not trying to shoehorn it in later, because there's probably things that I still aren't, I don't want to say I'm not doing quite right, but would have been much cleaner if I had started knowing that I was going to put in a router, right? I didn't do that at the beginning. And also something like Redux, which I don't have in there at all right now, but I'm kind of doing a Flux type pattern anyway. So if I was doing it again, I would probably start with understanding some of these, I'll say, major concepts and trying to get those baked in some way or another. Things, like Redux, like I said, a router or some sort of navigator, as if you use the one that is provided directly by React Native, and try to get some of those things set up, I'll say, the right way and clean. And I think that that I didn't introduce the React Native router Flux component until maybe January, February timeframe. maybe about 30 days before I published. And so I was trying to fit that in, and I really needed something like a router to handle push notifications, right? So a push notification comes in, I'm sending in a little payload of where I'm trying to drive the user when they click on the push notification. And there was a lot of trial by fire and a lot of app crashes when I was trying to figure out how to route properly based on payload from a push notification. And it probably would have been a lot easier if I had, knowing what I know now, if I had just set up a router early on and not tried to fit it in late in the game. But it's in. I guess it's in.
So are you guys using Flux or Redux, or what are you guys using for data architecture?
I would say so not Redux and not Reflux, but I would say it's a Flux-like pattern, right? So we have a data store that we built, I'll say our own sort of object, which acts as a data store and emits events. And so the bulk of this, I would say the state of the app is kept in this data store, including calls to our APIs. So we've got a number of APIs that we hit on Salesforce, kind of standard APIs that they provide. And then we have some custom APIs that we wrote to make the app work the way we wanted to and to work better and with fewer API calls. And so all of that's handled in the store that we have. But I'll say it's not a component to implement the store, but it's Flux-like patterns.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know you had said something about Firebase. I really like Firebase a lot, and I've used it quite a bit. So are you guys hooking Firebase into another service, and then React Native is kind of listening for changes, and then the data kind of gets synced that way? Is that how that's working?
So no, not yet. So our app, the React Native app, has no notion of Firebase at all. It's not talking to Firebase. The way we're using Firebase right now is we're essentially using it as a big pub sub. And so our embedded device that we deploy with our robot, which has some Node.js code on it, instead of having it talk directly to we use Heroku as well to process events. Instead of having it talk directly to our event engine and have to worry about connectivity and drop and who's got what data where, we send all of the communication to and from our embedded computer that we deploy, hundreds of miles away. All of that goes through Firebase. And so we find it to be obviously very resilient and scalable and fast and real time. And so events go through Firebase. We immediately pull them off. So we're just using it really like a pub sub. We're not using it as a data store at all. And when we need to communicate to the devices that we have out in the field, which could be a firmware update or a change program or things like that, we'll send data from our event worker to a node in Firebase that a particular embedded device is listening to.
One thing I find interesting, I think we've had a lot of discussions on here about teams and ramping up and all this, and there seems to be a thought out there that you have to have some kind of iOS native guy on your team to successfully get an app into production. You have to have that Objective-C or Swift guy. Yeah. But you guys did this without any real iOS resources. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So there's two of us, right? As any startup, they usually start small. There's two of us, and we've got quite a bit of breadth that we have to cover collectively, right? So I'm doing all the mobile app development, but and my partner, my co-founder, his specialty is on the robot deployment side of things, but he crosses into all of the Node code. He does a lot of the Node development, Firebase stuff, and so we're running a business, dealing with customers, writing mobile apps, writing Heroku code that deals with Postgres or other analytics engines, Firebase, BeagleBones that talk over cellular, and then by the way, designing robotic cells and programming robots. And so we're it's never easy. You always wish you had more hands to help, but React definitely makes it easy if you really devote some time to it to get something propped up. And once you if you spend this is my strong opinion is if you really devote just 1 week to learning React Native and playing with it. I mean, 1 week devote, and it doesn't have to be 8 or 10 hours a day, but every night, if you're working a full-time job, if you spend every night learning and playing with it, you're going to get hooked, right? And especially if you've got a purpose that you're trying to build, right? In our case, we were trying to build a mobile app. You're going to get hooked, and after a week, I think if you really devote a week to it, you're going to learn enough that you want to keep going. And so you just make the time, and you can iterate so quickly. It's pretty exciting to see what you're working on because it's in your pocket, right? You can deploy ad hoc version to your phone. You can put something out in test flight, and you can show people. And so that's pretty exciting.
Well, you don't sound like a busy guy at all with all those things you have going on there at your company, huh?
It doesn't, when you're, my thinking is when you're doing a startup, you're doing it because you love it and it doesn't feel like work, right? It feels like I'm doing things I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So like how many hours are you kind of putting in right now, you guys, between, this and everything else you have going on? And also I'm kind of curious, are you guys like funded by any investors, or are you kind of self-funded, or do you have enough sales that you guys are starting to become like profitable, or, how does that go?
Yeah. So, as far as time, both my co-founder and I I don't know. We like to think of ourselves as we're not the typical startup guys. We're both, I'm 40, he's 42. We have families with kids. And so, we put a lot of hours and blood, sweat, and tears into the business to get it going, as anybody would starting a business. But, we have families that we tend to as well that like to see us. But, as far as hours and time goes, it depends. We're certainly obviously spending all day and time on the weekends and sometimes time at night. And obviously when we are deploying a robot and we're on a customer site, it is long days. It may be 16, 18-hour days because we have every incentive, and we tell our customers this, we have every incentive to move fast. We want that robot up and making money and make productive for you so that it's making money for us as soon as possible. And so if that means long days, it means long days. But, like I said earlier, it doesn't feel like work when you really enjoy and love what you're doing. As far as, our business, so we are intentionally self-funded right now because we can afford to do so. But the very nature of our business, it's capital intensive, right? So we use capital to deploy a robot, and then we earn a revenue stream over time as the robot's productive. We're already starting some very early discussions with some potential investors because we can fund it to a point. We've got revenue coming in already. We can fund it to a point of being profitable, but the more success we have, we're going to outstrip the capital that we have. And so it will require somebody with deeper pockets than the two of us. But in the meantime, we're able to, we're starting those discussions now, not because we need it today, but we will need it tomorrow.
So is this doesn't sound like it's your first startup experience, because you guys sure seem to know what you're doing.
It is my first startup experience. It's my co-founder has started a few different businesses before, right? And so I can lean on him for the emotional roller coaster. But I think the advantage that we have, the disadvantage that we have is that we're not in our 20s without any, family commitments, right? We have family commitments, we have families, and we're both, I'm 40 and he's 42. But I think the benefit that we have is that we have a lot of industry experience, right? And we've run businesses or operations, and so we kind of know what we want, if that makes sense. And I'm sure we've made mistakes over the past 4 months or 3 months, whatever, and we'll continue to make mistakes. But we hope the mistakes that we make are small ones, and we recover quickly from them. But I think we're both fortunate enough that we've had enough business and engineering and different experiences that we're trying to avoid some mistakes I think that other maybe younger startups may go through because they just don't have as much professional experience.
Yeah, the whole idea of automation and robots is pretty fascinating. But I'm kind of curious. I see you guys, you were talking about doing some stuff, integrating with Slack and other things like that. I'm kind of curious where you see the future of your business. Is it going to be with those types of bots, or is it going to be a combination of a lot of things? And kind of what's your take on the whole idea of integrating your company, I guess, with conversational and other platforms, as far as maybe things like what is it, that Echo, the Amazon Echo, or maybe stuff like that.
There's, I guess what I would say in terms of where we see our business going, and I mean, the market's huge, right? So it's not, I'm not forecasting robotics in general, right? But I guess where I see us kind of fitting in and growing is in a couple different ways, and you hit on some of them. Integrating to more platforms and things that our customers desire. And so obviously we're very keen on Salesforce to do a lot of things for us. And if a customer, let's say, had Salesforce as their CRM tool, and they said, hey, is there any way to get some of this robot data that we're doing for, we're building a widget or something for our customer. We use Salesforce as a CRM tool to interact with our customer, so our sales guys know what and so there's an obvious way to shift data around to customer-facing tools or other internal tools like Slack that people are using. So there's definitely, we're collecting a lot of data that's real time on a shop floor that can be used in ERP systems, business systems, CRM things, communication tools like Slack. So that's definitely something that we're aware of and focused on. The other is, and we really, this is going to maybe sound a little far out there with the mobile app, and I certainly can see a path to doing this with React, is programming a robot is challenging. And so I don't know that that's ever, maybe in the days when AI gets to be extremely powerful, that will become far easier. But we can envision a way to get rid of a teach pendant on a robot and, to sort of mask that into the background and have the ability to program a robot with an app. And I don't just mean like just take the buttons that were on that interface and move them onto a different interface, but there's a lot of sensors that you get in a mobile device that you don't get in a teach pendant, like a gyroscope, an accelerometer, right? And so, imagine if there was a way to hold the phone in your hand and move it and have the robot following you because of the telemetrics that we were getting in kinematics from someone holding a phone as a way to teach a robot, maybe not extremely precise moves, down to a tenth of a millimeter or something like that, but to start programming rough moves. There's a lot of interactions that could happen between a mobile device and a mobile app and the robot that we don't believe are being exploited today.
That's some pretty wild stuff.
Yeah.
So did you guys, for the React Native to BeagleBone Node stuff, was there anything, I guess, unique there? I could just see where that would be an area where people would like to play around with, because, just small BeagleBone, nothing at the scale you guys are doing, but a lot of at-home guys like to build small BeagleBone projects. Do you see that becoming a kind of a maker's area?
Oh, no doubt. You can get a Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone fairly inexpensively, and there's a ton of stuff out there about how to get either precompiled or compile your own node. We like, the thing for us is JavaScript, as we've learned over the past, say, year, is you can use it everywhere, right? So we learn primarily one language. This isn't completely true, but primarily one language, and we can write code for an embedded device like a BeagleBone that's going to interact with Firebase. And then we can do things with React, which, is JavaScript essentially, or React Native, sorry. And so, absolutely a maker at home, a hacker, somebody that wanted to play around, do home automation projects, kind of tinker, someone at a hackathon, absolutely would recommend picking up one of these embedded computers that, learning JavaScript. Certainly Firebase is extremely easy to get going. If you wanted to have communication via the cloud, you could totally, compete at a hackathon on like GE has at least had, I don't know if they still do, First Build up in Louisville. And it's an amazing makerspace, place where they hold hackathons, because they've got the resources and money behind them with all sorts of tools. And you basically hack appliances for money. And so you could totally go into one of those hackathons where you're trying to hack a product with an embedded, with some knowledge of BeagleBone or Raspberry Pi, Node, React Native, Firebase, and make a product smart extremely quickly. Have I stumped you guys?
Hey, no, I'm actually looking at some stuff right now on the BeagleBone, just kind of messing around. I kind of played around with it about a year ago, I think it's been now.
So one of the things, if you're new, and this is again my experience certainly over the past 4 or 5 months, but over the past year playing with JavaScript, especially when you get into things like Node and doing things with React Native when you're doing API calls, is the asynchronous nature of it. And so that can, I think, stump some people who aren't used to it. I followed the instructions. I wrote, that I saw on some website. I wrote this series of code, and it doesn't seem like things are happening the way they should be. And so, that can be a little bit of a learning curve if you're doing these asynchronous events, like interacting with Firebase, making API calls, in our case, the Salesforce. The fact that, after you make this API call, code's going to continue to execute. You've got to know how you're going to respond later, some point later, when that response comes back. But once you kind of understand some of the principles there, you get beyond it pretty quickly. And, in my experience too, and this was extremely helpful in our app, because for our app, for example, we have the notion of dashboards. And so the customer can have multiple dashboards, which, think of a dashboard in React Native world as a list view with widgets on it. And a dashboard contains charts, which obviously dashboards are customizable, charts are customizable. They have the notion of robots because, obviously that's what we're selling, robots. And then we've got the notion of they can file a case in the app. They can post an idea. They can, a number of different concepts. And Salesforce has been an extremely powerful tool for us for a couple different reasons, right? We're building on some of the concepts that they already have. And they have the ability for people to write custom APIs on their platform. And so why that's important is when somebody fires up the app, I make once they're authenticated, or if they're already authenticated, I make a single API call from the app to a custom endpoint that I've developed on the Salesforce platform. And with that single API call, I get back, okay, for that user, I get a JSON object of here are the dashboards and charts that person has access to. Here's the robot or robots they have access to, all in a single API call instead of, making a series of API calls. And so there's a couple different endpoints that we developed to reduce the number of round trips we have to make from the app, to minimize the number of API calls we make on the platform, but also to improve the experience for the user. So they cut down on, back and forths.
Yeah, that sounds very powerful, and it sounds like a good use case for what you guys are doing, and it sounds like something that fits in with kind of what you need.
Yeah, Kevin's been pushing me toward looking at like GraphQL, and I really like the concepts of that, but I'm also building with the tools that I have today, and so what Salesforce provides has been extremely powerful, and their API is extremely powerful as well. Even the standard stuff that they have.
I can definitely see that, especially as a company that's a startup and you guys have a million things going on. Why sit there and try to reinvent the wheel if something is already working, right?
That's exactly right.
I find it kind of fascinating that someone with your expertise, someone that's been an electrical engineer, that's worked with IBM, that's now getting into software engineering and being a developer, you kind of recognize the JavaScript ecosystem, and you kind of, have looked at it and realized, hey, I can do all this stuff with one language, because we can sit here and argue all day about, whether or not JavaScript sucks as developers that are using, Ruby and all these, and Python and whatever. But it's very interesting to hear a point of view of someone like this and looking at all the options. And, you have a company and you kind of, saw this for yourself and kind of came to that conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And even I probably underestimate the power of JavaScript to be able to do a lot of the things that we do. So I've got friends that, I'll say have hacker tendencies on the side, and they love Python, or they love, pick your other language. And, I don't know those languages, so I'm not trying to cast any judgment one way or another. But what I do know is that I can learn primarily one language and do a lot of different things that we need to do as a business to stitch together a bunch of different services and not have to, switch between a ton of different languages. Some of the stuff that we have to do on the Salesforce platform is, they have their Apex language, which is very similar to Java. And so that's one place where we have to switch gears. And then the robot itself, we have access to the develop, we're not designing our own robots. We're using commercially available 6-axis robots. But the manufacturer that we have a preference with is the Danish company. We have access to some of their development kits and stuff, and there's Java there as well. But all the stuff in between is JavaScript.
It's pretty crazy to think about. Everyone has been talking about JavaScript fatigue and all this crap coming out, and like their lives are getting worse. But here you are cranking away after just, less than a year of experience in JavaScript and less than half a year of experience in React Native, and you've got a fully functional production ready app, and for me, like, that's huge. That means that like people are actually doing the things that they should be doing rather than, complaining about stuff not working out. You know what I'm saying?
Totally understand what you're saying and agree that, to me, I like to think of myself, I guess, as an outsider because I haven't been doing this for that long, but to me, the ecosystem is doing the right thing that somebody new like myself, my co-founder, can, and I'm not just talking about React and React Native, but the whole JavaScript ecosystem and Node and NPM, that people that are new can come in and pick it up and be productive really quickly. I mean, the ecosystem is doing something right. The things that you can get on GitHub, people are doing things right. And so I probably don't read as much about the fatigue as you do, maybe because I don't know where to find it, or I ignore it or don't agree with it. But, I see tons of positive out there.
I think we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up in just a couple of seconds. But before we do, I wanted to check and see if there's anything else that you guys wanted to cover or anything that you wanted to talk about, Rob, about your company that we kind of didn't already go over.
I don't think so. I've hit a lot of the points that I think I wanted to hit.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get into the picks now. Lee, do you have anything for us this week?
Yeah, my pick's going to be Zube.io, Zube.io, and it's a Kanban board for GitHub issues. And the way it integrates is pretty nice. We've tried a lot of different project management things over the years, and everybody likes how GitHub issues integrates directly into your repo, but it lacks a process, a way to apply a process. So it's kind of what Zube does. It gives you categories and in progress and review steps and puts it in a board for you. So that'd be my pick.
Okay. Rob, do you have any picks?
I would say React Native Chart is one. I mentioned it earlier. I haven't used it yet, but it's a repo that I've been following closely. And I think in the React Native world, having a strong charting and visualization tool set or library is going to be extremely powerful.
Okay. Peter?
So something that saved my butt, especially last time I looked into the camera component or view on an Android, there was like a $1,000 bounty for someone that could figure it out. Luckily, since then, someone's made React Native Image Picker. His name is Mark Schilling, and he made the entire thing really nice, where you've got the ability to take a photo and it'll work for both iOS and Android React Native, or choose a photo from your library. So that was kind of cool.
I would agree with Peter. We use Image Picker in our app to take and upload profile pictures and images to chat, and it's very cool.
Great. Okay, my picks are going to be the first one is botlist.co. It was on Product Hunt today, and it's basically labeled as an app store for bots. It's a really good place to go and not only find cool bots that you can integrate with what you're using, but it's also a good place to go and get ideas if you're looking for like a side project or something just to hack on. It's really cool. My second pick is going to be a book. It's called A Good Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. And it's kind of a modern explanation of Stoicism. And it's heavily inspired by a book that I also picked a few weeks ago, The Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So it's really cool. I'm kind of getting into reading about Stoicism, and it's pretty interesting stuff. So if you're interested in something non-technical, check it out. Okay, well, that wraps up episode 25 of React Native Radio. Rob, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to seeing everyone next week.